Hello, everyone, and welcome to this radcast of the Social Club at the End of the World. And on this segment, we are covering the topic of cooling Mother Earth. I used to call this segment, as recently as the last one that we recorded 2 weeks ago, I used to call it Refreezing the Arctic, because I see that as a crucial part of cooling Mother Earth. But I think it's valuable to look at it more holistically and, really identify what is the goal of refreezing the Arctic. The goal of refreezing the Arctic is to keep Mother Earth from overheating exponentially, which is arguably happening. I would take away the arguably. It's happening right now. And so how do we, slow down, put the brakes on that overheating, and ultimately, how do we reverse the overheating of Mother Earth? And I'll jump more into all that, but first let me welcome and recognize my co-participants. We've got Adam, and I'm Damon Shively, and I'm broadcasting for the moment from the Silicon Valley. I'm on the road, and we've got Adam in Olympia, Washington. We've got Jason in Long Beach, California. And we've got Miles in Calgary, Canada. Welcome, gentlemen. And I'm going to go on mute so everyone can say good morning.
Oh, good morning. I'm Adam Soul, and I'm happy to be here. Looking forward to this conversation. Thanks.
Good morning. I'm Jason from Long Beach. And I just wanted to say that I actually had somebody contact me the other day who wanted to help refreeze the Arctic. So obviously some people might be watching and think it might be our only hope or something. So yeah, let's have a conversation about
it. Good morning or afternoon, wherever you might be. My name's Miles. I'm in Calgary, Alberta, Canada. And it's been unusually hot for the month of May. We've had temperatures for the past week that we sometimes don't even see all year. Even in August, we sometimes don't get a stretch of heat like we're seeing. So it's definitely here, global or abrupt climate change. So we need to do something about it.
Absolutely. And if you look at, weather events around the world, just look at a sampling of the news, as Miles pointed out recently, 9 inches of rain near Baltimore in a few hours. And, now Florida is getting hammered again with another hurricane. I mean, it's like these 100-year storms are becoming the new normal. And yet, you never see in the media, in the major media, any kind of, synthesis of the obvious, which is that there's some really strange things happening in Denmark. And to paraphrase Shakespeare. So, but anyway, here at the Social Club at the End of the World, we are definitely facing these realities and saying, okay, what can be done? And to summarize the problem in its most simple terms, hey, Alex, welcome. Good morning. Good to see you.
Good morning.
All righty. Well, we're just talking about cooling Mother Earth and the imperative to do so, the evidence that Mother Earth is heating up. And I know everyone uses the term climate change instead of global warming because global warming is a bit too simplistic and climate change captures it kind of more holistically. However, I would like to say that the fundamental issue is, as regards abrupt climate change, is precisely that Mother Earth as a whole, as a system, is heating up. More energy is going into Mother Earth than is coming out. in the form of infrared radiation or other forms of shedding this heat that's coming in from the sun. So the fundamental issue as regards slowing down abrupt climate change, or even ultimately halting, or dare I say reversing abrupt climate change, or reversing this heating, is precisely changing the energy balance. Well, how on earth do you change the energy balance of a whole planet? Well, the simplest way is to reflect more of that sunlight that's coming in, reflect it back into space, right? People talk about greenhouse gases as causing global warming. What's causing global warming is not the greenhouse gases, it's the sun. And therefore the interplay and interaction of the sun with all these other elements, such as all these gases. So I'm just saying the obvious starting point to actually do something about this, an obvious starting point, in addition to reducing the greenhouse gases and whatnot, is simply reflecting away sunlight back into space. There's a number of ways to do that. But before we even get into those ways, I just want to make sure, are we all on the same page? Am I missing anything? What do you all think? So I'm just gonna go on mute for, as long as it takes, and welcome you all to jump in on this fundamental question, the framing of it, and are we looking at it the right way? Is the to address the urgency of abrupt climate change is the most, sensible place to focus from the standpoint of physics, reflecting sunlight back into space? Or is there a more obvious way or a more direct path to, halting this overheating, etc.? Going on mute.
Well, last night I was doing some study of Natalia Shkova, and she led a team of researchers, I believe from Russia, and has been researching the Arctic ice, I think, for the last 30 years. And they've discovered that the East Siberian Arctic shelf is a relatively shallow shelf. As average, the mean average depth is about 50 meters. And it covers an area the size of Texas, greater than Texas and Oklahoma combined. And underneath it, well, currently there's about 5 gigatons of carbon in the atmosphere total. And the amount of methane that's trapped underneath the East Siberian Arctic shelf is 100 times that much, at least. It's like 500 gigatons, and I've heard even more. And it's under pressure. And it's starting to escape. And in fact, the rate of escape is doubled since they started their studies. And so it's coming up like crazy. And just like Miles said, the temperatures are changing. And I've heard that this year it may be very likely that the Arctic will be completely ice-free, or close enough to start doing some real major changes. And then I've heard recently, I've heard Guy McPherson say that it looks like it's not going to be completely ice-free this summer. So we might have a little bit of reprieve, but not very much. I mean, we just have time to barely get going here. And so we need something dramatic and drastic. We need to think outside the box, in my opinion. I think, spreading thin-film material is one answer. And my answer would be that we need to use HAARP technology. That would be my answer. And I'll go on mute. Thank you.
All righty.
Ooh, I'll say something, Jamin. I think you're right that I guess you're right that the sun is causing global warming, but in a way it's energy balance is the key word, right? So the sun has always been emitting for whatever, has it been here longer than the Earth? I don't know that much planetary history, but it probably has. And our CO2, our greenhouse gas emissions, are layers. They are the blankets that keep the heat in. Now, simply, and the ice caps at the top and the bottom, I believe Antarctica is much bigger than the Arctic. I don't really know if there's science to explain why the Antarctic is so much bigger, but I know Antarctica is melting, but no one talks about that ever melting soon, and I just believe it's because there's a lot more ice down there. I don't think it's any other reason. And because the global north is the much harder, much more emitting. I don't know if it has to do that we're much more closer to the global north, the much more emitting CO2 cities, China, the U.S., or in the northern hemisphere. But you're right in the sense that if we simply somehow said, okay, white absorbs heat, so let's put something up there that deflects heat, something that's black or something that's aluminum or something that, you know, when you're in school, I'm in Texas right now. If I walk out with this black shirt, even though I'm going to feel fucking hot, whereas I shouldn't cuss, even if I wear a t-shirt, that will be a lot better. And so just a simple solution like that. I think, Jamie, you've also brought up, we have this huge problem with vast ocean acidification, because now it's warming from below because the ocean, the pH has changed so much. I think it like worldwide it's changed like 0.6 or something. I need to check that, but it's like, that's a huge amount for the whole ocean to change. It's just like global sea level rise. It's only gone up 20 centimeters overall. That means the whole Earth, 70% of the land area went up 20 centimeters. How much, think of how much, like no one can even imagine how much space that requires to move the entire Earth up 20 centimeters. And it's supposed to go up like, even the IPCC says 2 meters. So what else was I gonna say? And that is the essential problem. And the I think also I just tried to look up the study. I can't find a chart for the ice refreezing. The Arctic this summer or last winter, when the Arctic goes into winter, it's perpetual darkness. You don't see the sun for that whole winter. When it goes after September, if you go to the Arctic, it's perpetual darkness. Because of the acidification, the Arctic apparently didn't refreeze at all. No ice was regained last summer, or very little, that satellites can't pick it up. And so, anyway, everyone knows we're in dire straits. But in terms of the meaningful problem, Jamin stated it. The sad thing about climate change is there's a lot of other problems. You know, people don't. There's like there's the ocean acidification problem. There's the population problem. So just the resources we need, the food we need, all the forestry cutting down from animal agriculture. You know, something essential to any time I talk about solving climate change is we all need to go vegan or vegetarian, just because that's the second biggest cause of carbon emissions. But in terms of fixing this in the near how, solving the Arctic just to give us enough time to deal with the nuclear problem, I mean, if that's just not to add too many items on the to-do list. That's it.
Great comments, Alex. Indeed, it is quite a cluster mess, to put it mildly, 007, of everything that's compounding. And but you've hit the nail on the head. It's the heat balance. It's the heat balance. It's not, just to look at the radiative forcing from the sun is just one part of it. And of course, the fundamental issue that almost everyone is aware of is that the greenhouse gases are simply trapping that heat. It's not that too much heat is coming in. It's just that the normal, cooling process of infrared, Mother Earth cooling herself through emitting infrared radiation, that's getting blocked by the greenhouse gases. But one way or another, we need to bring Mother Earth back into balance from a standpoint of heat. And given that carbon sequestration is seems to me to be a bit more of a long-term project, given the technologies available for sequestering carbon, including holistic land management, transforming land use so that organically more carbon gets sequestered and whatnot. But all those mechanisms for sequestering carbon seem to me to be at a much more longer time scale than what we could do in the very short term in terms of increasing the albedo or reflectivity. How much sunlight are we reflecting back into space? So anyway, going on mute.
I did want to say that I was going to agree with like Adam and Alex here that there are, a ton of issues. I mean, I guess just in general, just saying we're trying to cool the planet. If you're just using that as a PR way, then sure. It seems like you're looking for the best terminology to use in order to get people to pay attention or something. Then maybe that works. But I was going to say that Adam brings up a good point about the methane, and that's one of the reasons why I thought refreezing the Arctic was the only reason you'd really want to refreeze the Arctic is to try to stop the methane from coming out. It may already be too late, but the methane to me has always seemed to be this big ticking time bomb that no one really talks about. And I was even at a sort of like a hippie type festival called LIB, or Lightning in a Bottle, this weekend. And I went to some speakers that they have some talks. They had people come and talk. And one of them was called Reversing Climate Change. And it was sort of also talking a lot about, well, anyway, so I listened to that, and it was interesting because there weren't that many people there for the Reversing Climate Change. There was like barely anybody in there. There was, the next day there was one on aliens, and this guy, I'm sorry, but this guy was out there. But like, people loved it. I even thought it was pretty entertaining. It was packed. The place was packed. Everybody wanted to see this. But the Reversing Climate Change, no one really cared about. And quite frankly, it wasn't like, they never really got into the methane issue at any point. They acknowledged it at one point, but then just continued talking about, everything. So I think that the methane is sort of something that's being swept under the rug, even by scientists who work at important institutes and write books. And, I would say that definitely trying to keep the methane in the ground would be somewhere on the top of the list. I think you're right that cooling the planet via shading mechanisms would be a great topic too to talk about. How are we going to do that? Are we going to put it, like, have them on satellites in space, or are they going to be blimps with carrying fabric in between them to try to bounce it off? Are we just going to paint all the roofs white or with reflective material in a city area? I mean, I've also heard that even just painting all our streets white would help us reflect back quite a bit of energy or sunlight. But I don't know. I don't really know the science behind how effective that would be in actually cooling the planet. Anyhow.
All righty. Good stuff. So, yeah, go ahead, Miles.
So yeah, this may be more appropriate in the next hour, coming up with the new narrative, but we do, and waking people up, because talking about this warm 10 days or at least a week that we've had here. On the radio this morning, after dropping my daughter off at her school, the DJs are chit-chatting and they're joking about, I don't know, this business of you don't need air conditioning in Calgary, that's no longer true, or that's not true. And they're laughing about it, like, and there's no mention as to, well, this is abrupt global climate change. So it's like, hello, people, we got to wake them up. Now, with respect to solutions, for what it's worth, I do get into a lot of trouble with my wife. She says, you got to stop buying books and get a job to pay for these books. But this is a book that I just recently purchased, and it was fairly expensive. And it's by Julian Cribb, out of Australia, and he is a environmental journalist or scientific journalist. So he's doesn't have a science degree himself, but in journalism he's been focusing on science for decades. And this is his latest book, and it's full of it's surviving the 21st century, humanity's 10 great challenges and how we can overcome them. So to what was being said, I think already, we need to realize as well, there's some other serious issues going on at the same time, such as nuclear power plants are stationary ticking time bombs, and species extinction, so he's talking about the need to rewilding of the planet. And, when you think about it, rewild the planet would conceivably have a beneficial effect on drawing down CO2. Because if we said, okay, we've got to, we've got to start eating a more vegetable-based diet. We need to plant more trees and hemp farms, and we need to restore the biodiversity, because that's another shocking thing. Something since 1970, I forget what it is exactly. The stats are in here, and you've maybe heard of them, but half of the large animals have gone extinct. So, I will. So, and just one more book talking about solutions, and my goal is to get off of the book buying bandwagon and actually start doing things. But you had Terry Patton on last one of the previous hangouts in the social club here at the End of the World, and I purchased A New Republic of the Heart, and it's a fantastic document. And he mentions a gentleman named Ken Wilber. He's partnered with Ken Wilber on a previous book, and I thought, well, who's this Ken Wilber? He sure sounds like an interesting person. So the last couple of days I've been on YouTube listening to Ken Wilber, and it's like, oh my gosh, here's another real powerful thought leader. And what he's talking about is we have to overcome the ethnocentric philosophies that we have. So I believe in the Bible, but I don't call myself a Christian anymore. And that actually, I've learned, is very much in keeping with what this Ken Wilber says. All of these different archetypes that we've had, these creation stories over the years, they all have validity. And if you raise yourself to a higher level of thinking, this integral level of thinking, getting from the very lowest is when we're kids, we are selfish, egocentric. But as you rise in your act of growing, your act of awakening, and then something he's calling the helping phase, you rise above the differences and you see the interconnectedness. So it's about us getting past all these divisions in philosophy as well. So with that, I'll pause. But
thank you, Miles. And I do want to point out that definitely a lot of what you're discussing is definitely fits better in the next segment that we're going to have on A New Story for Humanity. And just to be clear on that, because the reality is all these topics are interrelated. And if you say, well, if we want to get to the root of it, we need to look at it holistically, and we need to look at this and this, and humanity is the problem, so what's wrong with humanity and all that. However, having said that, if we don't bound it, right, and talk about like how are we going to, cool Mother Earth, like from a scientific, from an engineering standpoint, et cetera, and we, go off into these other tangents, we'll never really address that topic. So that's why I kind of segmented. You see what I'm saying, Miles? That's why I really like to kind of bound it, and I leave a full 2 hours for the New Story for Humanity, because that's a much kind of deeper topic. So I just wanted to request that we focus on cooling Mother Earth during this first hour. I also want to welcome Adam, who just joined. And as you can see, yeah, welcome. How are you doing today?
Pretty good. Got off work early, so
great.
Finally figured out how to use this thing as well. So
awesome. Well, welcome. One thing we all use is the mute button. So when we're not talking, we all mute, and that reduces echo and whatnot. If you need help on finding that, just let me know. I also want to welcome Aaron, who just joined. Welcome, Aaron. We're talking about cooling Mother Earth and how do we accomplish that. One thing I wanted to bring up is that we discussed this quite a bit at our last Sierra Club dinner, on last Thursday, May 24th, in Berkeley, and where we had Professor Mark Jacobson as our keynote speaker. Professor Jacobson is a professor at Stanford, and he's also director of the Atmosphere Energy Program at Stanford. He gave a really great presentation. It's up on YouTube. And then afterwards, both in the discussion after dinner as well as in follow-up emails, we've been talking about how do we reflect more sunlight back into space through either creating clouds or whitening the clouds that already exist. And there are some really interesting arguments and facts put forth on both sides of that. Some of our folks at the dinner and in the email discussions afterwards have been talking about, you know, ways of cloud seeding or cloud formation, spraying ocean water particles up into the air to create essentially artificial clouds to reflect away sunlight. And one of the counterpoints that was made is that, you know, at any given moment, 69% of the Earth's surface is already covered with clouds, so why do we need more clouds, right? Or so that, you know, it's already very clouded. Well, as far as I'm concerned, since the fundamental issue as regards abrupt climate change and is heating, and the fundamental issue around heating, as Alex pointed out, is the energy balance, energy coming in, energy going out. You know, one obvious way of affecting that energy balance to slow or ultimately stop the heating is to reflect away sunlight back into space. You know, we can talk about all the consequences of not doing that, the consequences of increased heating, such as the melting of Arctic sea ice, which then releases, you know, clears the way for massive amounts of methane to then be released to the atmosphere, which is a super potent greenhouse gas, and then increase the problem of heating even further, right? But to get to the immediate, what needs to be done right away, in addition to sequestering greenhouse gases, we need to reflect that sunlight back into space to bring it more into balance. See, balance is energy coming in and energy going out are exactly equal. So there is no more net heating of the planet. That's obviously a threshold that needs to be crossed before we get to the point that we're actually net cooling the planet. Given that we're in a bit of a runaway train kind of situation right now, in terms of runaway heating, it seems to me quite clear that the very first thing we need to do is to reflect away that heat. Now, if we want to do that at a planetary level, fine. Or if we want to do that with particular emphasis on the Arctic itself, given the criticality of maintaining Arctic sea ice and to the extent we can, even rebuilding our stock of Arctic sea ice, you know, whichever, whether we do this reflecting around the entire planet or in a concentrated way in the Arctic or both of the above, whatever, that's the fundamental thing that we need to grapple with. So as to the counter argument that there's already, you know, 69% of the planet at any point is covered with, you know, with clouds that are doing a great job of reflecting away sunlight. Well, what about the other 31%, right? So if at any given moment there is sunlight hitting dark blue sea ocean anywhere around the world, that's an opportunity to create some artificial clouds and reflect that back into space, right? Now, is it that simple? It's not that simple. Here, let me read one of the comments from the email thread after the dinner. Let's see. Well, okay. One of the risks of spraying of aerosols generally, you know, because part of the cloud seeding, you know, involves spraying aerosols. I just want to be clear on that. You know, for creating the cooling effect by creating these artificial clouds, one way to do it is to spray seeds up there to seed droplets condensing and therefore cloud formation. Another is simply spraying ocean water into the air and creating the droplets that way. So it can be done by seeding or simply mechanically spraying droplets in the air. But one of the effects that's talked about that would be an unintended negative consequence of, for example, just spraying aerosols willy-nilly, is that whereas in the daytime, those have a net effect of reflecting away sunlight, at nighttime, when the sun is not shining, they can serve as yet another blanket for keeping in the infrared radiation. So that it simply needs to be looked at holistically, and a balance needs to be struck. But like one of the things that occurred to me is ocean water could be sprayed up in the air in the daytime. Droplets of, whatever optimal size, such that by the time the sun sets, they have fallen back to Earth. You guys see what I'm saying? From gravity, right? So it's like we could find some sort of a dynamic solution to that, where we spray it up as needed in a very targeted way to reflect away sunlight, and then, either gravity or some other mechanism can take it down at night so that we don't add to the problem. But anyway, the bottom line to me, it just seems so darn clear. At a planetary level, the governments of the world, the nonprofits, the academic community, we should be focusing like crazy on how the heck do we reflect away sunlight back into space, right? We're dying. We are dying. Life on Earth is dying. And, we as a species are just, I think, that's why I have a dedicated hour to this, to cooling Mother Earth.
Jamin?
Yes, sir.
So, yeah, thank you as chairman for bringing me to the focus. And I guess just, when we talk about that in the next hour, it's changing the ethos for the revolution, as Terry Patton says, it is related very importantly, because we have to get these military budgets diverted both in Russia and in the United States away from $1 trillion upgrade of the nuclear weapons system to what you're talking about. Now, to that point, this Julian Cribb in his book, Surviving the 21st Century, Humanity's 10 Great Challenges and How to Overcome Them, I turned to the chapter about the issue of global warming and what we must do. There's a quote here. Ban Ki-moon was the Secretary General of the United Nations, summarized the urgency of climate situation thusly, quote, "We are the last generation that can fight climate change. We have a duty to act." He said that in 2015. Now, I have in front of me a list of 10 things of what we must do to cool the planet, initiatives, countermeasures to mitigate global warming. And there's 9 listed, and such as you mentioned, things such as feeding, cloud seeding in different ways, generating micro bubbles on the ocean's surface to whiten it and reflect more sunlight, feeding the oceans on iron particles to make their algae absorb more CO2. And as I mentioned previously, global reforestation, especially in the tropics and savannas, to soak up more CO2. So there are these things, there's this list here, and we're talking about them. In fact, we're on this other page of what we can do. It says, join online global social media to share ideas, express views, and send a signal to governments and corporations all around the planet that its citizens want the carbon emissions ended. And that's why I appreciate when people control their language. I worked on an oil rig, so I knew a guy who used an F-bomb every other word, literally. So I appreciate that we're going to keep, our language appropriate for a wide audience, because we need to have this for the maximum circulation of these ideas. And it's a matter of, the lists of ideas are here. We have to get the money and dedicated to doing something today. On that, I'll mute.
Well, there you go again, talking about money. We need to find the money to do it. And that's always the problem. So, and I agree with Jason that the reason we need to refreeze the Arctic is to stop the release of methane, because the permafrost is melting, and also the under the what do they call it, this the frozen, it's almost frozen, but it's the permafrost that's under the ocean and under the water, especially on that East Siberian shelf. So it's imperative that we refreeze the Arctic. And it always comes down to a matter of money. And so I wrote this, and I'm writing a white paper, and I wrote this paragraph, which I'll just read real quick. Let me see. It says, the science tells us that it is physically possible for mankind to refreeze the Arctic. The ice that covers the Arctic Ocean is basically a bank of ice instead of a bank of money. And essentially all man has to do is add to the ice to bring the bank up to proportions that are once again sustainable and safe. A team of researchers from the School of Earth and Space Exploration at Arizona State University, in their report published on 19 December 2016 in the Earth's Future and Open Access AGU Journal, entitled Arctic Ice Management, says that the Arctic can be covered with 100 million wind-operated pumps that will suck up and spray out seawater that will freeze and build up the ice. The report says that the cost to cover the Arctic with pumps over a 10-year period is 0.64% of the world's GDP, or 3.8 trillion US dollars, which is 13% of the USA's yearly federal budget. The report goes on to say that the production of ice by these wind pumps is so efficient that 10% or 10 million of the wind pumps might be enough, which is, of course, good news. The report adds that covering the entire Arctic with 100 million wind pumps is comparable to the entire U.S. automobile industry every year for 10 years, or the cost of the Iraqi war. Therefore, refreezing the Arctic is doable if we can come up with the money. So we need to refreeze the Arctic. The science has proved that we can refreeze the Arctic, but it comes down to a question of money again. And I think we're in a global emergency, and it's time to it's like the policeman who needs a car. You know, he's in an emergency and he needs a car really fast, and so he doesn't go to the rental place and rent a car. He takes a car, he commandeers one, and I think that's where we need to be. And so they've proven that we can refreeze the Arctic. So why aren't we doing it? Why isn't the government doing it? Well, it's $3.8 trillion. Well, there's no money to be made, I guess. I don't know, but why aren't we hiring a contractor to go up there and get it done? That's my question. I'll go on mute.
So, Adam, I just wanted to jump in there. A contractor from the East Coast of the United States did contact me. I'm going to check that he's okay with me mentioning his name. He's been saying he's going to come on and talk with us. But he sounds like a go-getter. Like, I don't know with what money he's proposing we do this, but maybe we could start a Kickstarter. And people might even think it's a fucking joke, but, maybe they would pay to watch it, watch it live on YouTube. But I'm just saying, he says he'll go up there and try to get a crew of people to meet him up there and start building the ice up or doing whatever needs to be done to get it done. So, I mean, we could put a call out to people who are interested in helping, but they're going to probably only be people who are aware of how severe the issue is. And a lot of people have their heads up their ass. So.
Yeah. I can see that the topic is gravitating towards how do we get humanity's head out of our collective butt. And that's obviously essential. That's really the topic for the next hour, which we're rapidly approaching. Which I simply put under the banner of a new story for humanity, because ultimately, if we're going to get humanity mobilized, the governments of the world mobilized, the militaries of the world repurposed from destroying, people and property to doing something constructive, we need a new story for humanity, right? And that's what we'll cover in the next hour. But just to, put it in a nutshell, the way I see it, our current story basically goes like this. The more you hoard for yourself, the better off you will be. Period. That's about the essence of our current modality of life. And so we need a radical shift to a new modality that says, hey, we're all in this together. It's not about how much I can hoard relative to you, Michael, or relative to all of you, right? It's what can we do together with all of our collective assets, including our collective intelligence. So it's basically how deep down the rabbit hole do you want to go? But the purpose of this hour of Cooling Mother Earth is really to try to have the discipline to focus on the engineering and science conversations of what can be done physically, regardless of what's politically possible or impossible or financially possible or impossible. What is physically possible that could be done? And then, and the reason I really want to focus on that during this first hour, and review it systematically on a weekly basis and expand upon it, is because if we do not present to the world a picture that this actually can be done, forget about people getting excited about doing something that they don't even know is possible, right? So let's talk physics first. That's why we talk about this in the first hour. And then in the second, talk about, okay, what are all the things that we're going to need to do to make the physics happen? How do we wake people up? How do we change culture? How do we, persuade governments? How do we get the story out? Do you guys see what I'm saying? Going on mute.
Okay, so as I said, under the chapter of cooling the Earth, there's a list of countermeasures or measures we can take. So if it's something like cease burning all fossil fuels by 2030 and replace them with renewables, that's number one in this fellow's Julian Cribb's list. Is that germane to what you want to talk about?
Absolutely, absolutely. Okay. But I would even bracket that. No, that's definitely germane, Miles, to answer your question. Absolutely, it's germane, but I would kind of chunk it out into two things. One is kind of like long-term solutions, like, shift from a carbon economy to renewables. And another is short-term emergency measures, right? So here's the scenario. We're in a car, the brakes are failing, and we're cruising down this hill to near certain death if we don't stop the car from accelerating downwards, right? There's kind of two conversations that we could have. One, how the hell do we slow down the car right now in the here and now, right? Another might be, what would be a better system of braking so that we don't have this problem in the future, right? You see the difference? One is immediate here and now, and the other is kind of more long-term. And the immediate here and now, how the heck do we cool the planet now? Right now in the short term, because we're in a downward death spiral that's going very, very, very quickly, right? And so I would put, spraying ocean water into the air to reflect away sunlight and produce immediate cooling now. That would be analogous to what do we need to do with the car, the steering wheel, the parking brake, the whatever right now to save our asses right now. I would put, sequestering carbon and shifting to renewables as more of a conversation. Hey, if we make it out of this emergency downward death spiral that we're in right now, like in a time scale of months, then it would be great when we get back to the shop to figure out a better braking system for the car so that we don't get into this mess in the future. You see the difference?
Okay, right. So here, let me give you some related to specific cooling
type measure.
Well, before we do that, I'd like to hear some feedback from you, Miles, on the specific question of kind of like, you know, bifurcating it into the emergency moment that we're in right now. How do we have cooling happen right now versus kind of more longer term? You get that, and you agree that those are.
I'm trying to make sure I'm giving you what you want in this hour. So here's number one, and I don't know, Alex, if you want to type it into the chat there, just so we can keep track of them. I'll just summarize the first one of these techno fixes, as he calls it, aimed at cooling the Earth artificially. So number one, spraying sulfate particles into the upper atmosphere as the volcanoes do to create a sunshade effect and cool the planet. So now I could pause and we can talk about that. Who's got the sulfate in the plane? You know, like if you want to get into like engineering on each one of these.
Well, before we even go there, I was just trying to have a little bit of a higher level conversation, just to, number one, differentiate between engineering and physics solutions versus kind of these more upstream solutions of how do we, you know, how do we wake up humanity? How do we shift our mindset? How do we transform our modality of life on Earth, et cetera? I was just trying to have a high level just so that we don't keep, you know, falling into the ditch of, you know, veering off topic, right?
Right. So it's strictly something that we can engineer to restore or be an artificial air conditioner to replace the Arctic ice.
Well, that's a subset of it, right? But it's generally, the topic for this hour is how do we cool Mother Earth? And then that further bifurcates into short-term immediate versus kind of more long-term systemic, right?
Yeah, so that's what spraying sulfate particles can do.
Bingo. So spraying sulfate particles is in that short-term immediate. It's something that could be done short-term immediate to reflect away sunlight and have some net cooling, you know, bring it back into balance. Of course, you know, the issue with spraying sulfate particles into the atmosphere, which may be happening already, is, you know, myriad unintended consequences. Right, that could have.
Right.
You know,
Paul Beckwith. Can I say something?
Yeah.
Paul Beckwith. He talks about refreezing the Arctic, and he you know, he gives some good. He says we can build dams at places where the Arctic seawater escapes, like up between. There by Alaska, where the Aleutian chain goes out, there's a small area there where we could not build a dam, but somehow block the ice from escaping. So that's one thing. Then there's thin film reflective material. Then there's sea pumps spraying seawater. Then there's airplanes spraying sulfates, and you know, and those are what 4 or 5 different things that can be done. There's one more thing that I've said before and that is HAARP technology. And HAARP was designed as a weather instrument, a weather modification instrument, and it was originally developed by Tesla, and it's able to create. I mean, Tesla claimed he knew how to split the Earth in half. And they developed part of HAARP technology was so that they could send extremely low frequency waves through the Earth and communicate with submarines. And also, but the main thing is that HAARP sends beams up to the ionosphere. And so it is true that HAARP has been sold to the University of Alaska or given to them or something, but HAARP was a 5 gigawatt plant, and now there's a 100 gigawatt plant in Europe, and there's all kinds of numerous HAARP technology plants all over the world. And also Digisons, which just are like receivers that just record all this information. And we're not really being told about it, but if you look it up, you'll find out that HAARP technology is prevalent, and it's all over the world, and it is a weather modification tool, and it may be able to be used to refreeze the Arctic just simply by pushing buttons. And personally, I think that's our best hope, because we need something to act fast. We can't afford to wait around and build up till we make all these machines and floating platforms and or get hooked on spraying aerosols. We've already got global dimming effect. That's already a problem. If we keep, and Paul Beckwith says that what we're going to do, he says, what we'll end up doing is spraying sulfates up in the air. We'll have jets up there flying over the Arctic, and that's probably what we're going to end up doing, which is unfortunate. So that's all I wanted to say.
Okay. Anyway,
real quick, Jamin, before I know we're out of time. But you know, just because I'm hearing anybody talk about it, you know, it's becoming, you know, more and more possible to send large quantities of stuff to space, and you know, solar shading, you know, up in space, I think has some unique advantages. And I just, you know, I think that should be explored. You know, what does it cost per pound to send things up into you know, space?
Yeah, absolutely. So just to kind of wrap up, we do need to adjourn this one so I can start the next one on A New Story for Humanity. But I think one huge takeaway from today is, number one, during this hour, Cooling Mother Earth, we need to stay on topic, because we've spent a lot of time today both getting off topic and then trying to get ourselves back on topic and then having meta conversations about topics. So I think it'd be super productive if we stay on topic in the future. And when we're on topic, let's have, you know, focused conversations. If it's going to be a conversation about HAARP, rather than try to cram it in like, you know, 30 seconds, I think most people still don't even have a clue what HAARP is. So let's start with, you know, when we do talk HAARP on the next one, if we do, let's say, look, here's what HAARP is. Here's the idea. We'll talk about that. Then when we talk about, you know, creating artificial clouds, we can have a focused thing about that. So rather than, you know, just try to rattle off a list and hit on a bunch of things, you know, let's spend 5 minutes talking about one, 5 minutes talking about the other, so we can start to zero in on what do we really need to focus on. What is our, you know, ultimately what I'd love to come out of this is some sort of consensus that what we need to do short term immediately is this, whether it's HAARP, whether it's thin film reflective material, whether it's bubbling, etc. But anyway, so bottom line takeaway from today, let's all please stay on topic. When we're on the topic of cooling Mother Earth, let's stay on that, focusing on the physics and on the engineering. In the next hour, we totally open it up and we talk about A New Story for Humanity. So let's try to keep this barrier between these two topics. And in general, we've got so many topics that we need to build out in the toposphere of topics, but let's try to keep each one as focused on exactly what its domain is. Fair enough? Okay, great. Thanks, everyone. Awesome. All right, I'm going to adjourn this, and in about 2 minutes, I'll send out 2 or 3 minutes, I'll send out the link for A New Story for Humanity. Hope to see you all there. We'll see you soon. Thanks so much, everyone. See you soon.